My name is Rebecca, 27, and I'm still shaking as I type this. Last night's family dinner changed everything. Across the mahogany table, my sister Amber's lips curled into that familiar smirk before she dropped the bomb. You have 3 days to leave the house. Mom and Dad just watched, their faces blank and complicit.
How could they?
After losing my job and being at my most vulnerable, finding out my family had conspired behind my back felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The inheritance document slid across the table told a story of betrayal I never saw coming. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been blindsided by family. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. I grew up in a colonial-style home in Greenwich, Connecticut, with a sprawling backyard where I spent most of my childhood. It was my sanctuary, especially during those hot summer days when Grandma Eleanor would visit and teach me how to tend to her beloved rose garden. Roses need patience and care, just like relationships, she'd say, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Those moments with her were precious, a stark contrast to the competitive atmosphere that often plagued our household. Until 3 months ago, I was thriving as a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley. My trajectory was upward, with consistent praise from managers and a potential promotion on the horizon. Then came the corporate restructuring. "We're eliminating your entire department," my manager said with rehearsed sympathy. Suddenly, after 6 years of building my career, I was unemployed with an economy that wasn't exactly welcoming to job seekers. Moving back to my parents' house was supposed to be temporary, just until I could rebuild my savings and find another position. When I arrived with my suitcases, Mom, Diana, made my favorite childhood meal, lasagna with extra cheese, and Dad, Thomas, helped carry my boxes to my old bedroom, which they'd kept mostly intact. "Stay as long as you need," Mom had said, squeezing my shoulder. "Family supports family during tough times." Those words would later feel like the cruelest joke. My sister Amber and I were never close. 2 years younger, but infinitely more calculating, she turned everything into a competition from the moment she could talk. When I won first place in the district science fair at 12, she accidentally knocked my trophy off the shelf, shattering it beyond repair. When I got accepted to Cornell, she somehow managed to make my parents' congratulatory dinner about her internship opportunity. It was always subtle. Never enough to call her out without seeming petty, but enough to create a constant undercurrent of tension. Amber married Harrison 3 years ago, a merger more than a marriage, as I secretly thought of it. Harrison Chapman came from old money and had expanded the family fortune through real estate development. Their wedding was featured in local society pages, with Amber gleefully sending me clippings even though I'd attended the lavish affair. "Isn't it amazing what we've accomplished?" she'd say, the "we" clearly meaning her and Harrison, not including me in any sense. What always hurt most was how my parents subtly favored Amber. They'd deny it vehemently if confronted, but the evidence was there. They attended every single one of her tennis matches, but missed my important presentations due to scheduling conflicts. They prominently displayed her wedding photos, but tucked my graduate school diploma in the study bookshelf. Small things, perhaps, but they accumulated over the years like tiny paper cuts. Grandmother Eleanor was different. She saw through Amber's manipulations and made a special effort to support me. "You have substance, Rebecca," she'd whisper when no one else was around. "Your sister is flash, but you have staying power." When she passed away 2 months ago at 87, I felt like I'd lost my only true ally in the family. The funeral was somber, and even Amber seemed genuinely sad, though she spent more time networking with wealthy relatives than reflecting on Grandma's life. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs earlier. About 2 weeks after moving back in, I caught snippets of hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when I entered the room. "We can't discuss this now," Mom would whisper urgently. Once, I distinctly heard my name mentioned before Dad cleared his throat loudly upon noticing me in the doorway. Mail addressed to me mysteriously disappeared. When I mentioned expecting an important document from my former employer, Mom vaguely suggested that mail gets lost sometimes. Dad started avoiding eye contact during our previously comfortable morning coffee ritual, suddenly very interested in his newspaper whenever I tried to engage him in conversation. Most telling was Amber's increased presence at the house. Normally, she visited our parents maybe once a month, making excuses about her busy social calendar. Suddenly, she was stopping by 3 or 4 times a week, often when I was out job hunting. Once, I returned early and found her, Mom, and Dad huddled around papers on the dining room table, which they hurriedly gathered up when they saw me. The day of the fateful dinner, I received a text from Amber. Important family dinner tonight. Be there at 7. Formal. The commanding tone was typical Amber, but the important designation set off alarm bells. What family matter could be so significant that it required a formal dinner announcement? Mom spent the day in a flurry of nervous activity, preparing Grandma Eleanor's special pot roast recipe, something she only made for significant occasions. When I offered to help, she jumped slightly as if I'd startled her. No, I've got it under control, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Maybe just set the table with the good china? Dad was conspicuously absent most of the day, claiming he needed to run errands, though he returned empty-handed. When he did come back, he retreated to his study, the door firmly closed. I knocked once to ask if everything was okay, and his "everything's fine" sounded strained, unconvincing. That afternoon, while looking for a particular photo to include with a job application, I noticed Grandma Eleanor's photo album had been moved from its usual place on the bookshelf. When I found it on Dad's desk, several photos had been removed, including ones of Grandma and me in front of the house. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I dismissed it as paranoia born from stress. How wrong I was. Our dining room has always been a showcase space, rarely used except for holidays and special occasions. That evening, it was transformed with the best linens, the crystal glasses that had belonged to my great-grandmother, and candles that cast long shadows across the table. The formality of it all only heightened my anxiety. This wasn't a casual family dinner. This was a production, a stage set for something significant. Mom had arranged the seating with careful placed cards, another unusual touch for a family of just 4. I noticed immediately that my usual spot had been changed, placing me directly across from where Amber would sit, with my back to the window rather than facing it as I preferred. A small power play, perhaps, but it set the tone. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Amber arrived with Harrison in tow, though he hadn't been mentioned in the invitation. She wore a designer dress more suited to a business meeting than a family dinner, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp features. Harrison looked uncomfortable in his tailored suit, constantly checking his watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. "Rebecca, you look comfortable," Amber said by way of greeting, her eyes taking in my business casual attire with poorly disguised disdain. There was something predatory in her expression, a cat about to pounce on an unsuspecting mouse. Throughout the appetizer course, conversation remained stiltedly polite. Dad discussed the weather with unnatural enthusiasm. Mom kept jumping up to check on the main course, though I knew from experience that everything was already perfectly timed. Amber kept exchanging knowing glances with our parents, while Harrison maintained a businesslike demeanor, as if attending a corporate dinner rather than a family gathering. By the time dessert arrived, Grandma's apple pie recipe that Mom had clearly spent hours perfecting, my nerves were stretched to breaking point. I was just about to directly ask what this dinner was really about when Amber delicately placed her fork down, dabbed her mouth with her napkin, and cleared her throat. "Now that we've enjoyed Mom's wonderful cooking," she began, her voice carrying that false sweetness I'd known since childhood, "it's time to discuss the real reason for tonight's gathering." She reached into a designer handbag hanging on her chair and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. "As you know, Grandma Eleanor's will was finalized just before her passing," Amber continued, her eyes never leaving my face, watching for my reaction. "What you don't know is that there were some significant changes made to her earlier drafts." She paused for effect, her lips curling into that smirk I'd come to despise over the years. "The house now legally belongs to me." And I'm giving you 3 days to pack your things and leave. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at the envelope but couldn't bring myself to touch it, as if it might burn my fingers. My gaze darted to my parents, searching for confusion, protest, anything that would indicate this was as much a surprise to them as it was to me. Instead, I found Dad suddenly fascinated by the tablecloth pattern, refusing to meet my eyes. Mom's face crumpled slightly, tears gathering, but her silence spoke volumes. "You knew," I whispered, my voice barely audible even in the deathly quiet room. "You all knew about this?" "It's all perfectly legal," Harrison interjected, his tone suggesting he was concluding a business transaction. "The documents have been verified by 2 separate attorneys. The property transfer has already been processed. Your grandmother was of sound mind when she made these changes." I felt dizzy, the room seeming to tilt around me. But why? Why would Grandma do this? She loved me. She loved this house. She always said a lot of things, Amber cut in sharply. The reality is, she recognized who was more deserving in the end, who had built a successful life versus who was. She paused, examining her manicured nails before delivering the final blow, the family failure. The cruelty of the words knocked the breath from my lungs. I'd lost my job due to corporate restructuring, not personal failure. I'd been working tirelessly to rebuild.
How dare she?
"That's not fair, Amber," Mom finally spoke, her voice weak and unconvincing. "Life isn't fair," Amber replied dismissively. "The fact remains that I own this house now, and I have plans for it that don't include supporting my unemployed sister indefinitely. 3 days is generous, considering." I turned to my father, the man who had taught me about integrity and standing up for what's right. "Dad, you're okay with this? With throwing me out when I have nowhere to go? After you said I could stay as long as I needed?" Dad shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders hunched. "It's complicated, Rebecca. There are legal considerations. The will is binding." "Legal considerations?" I echoed incredulously. "I'm your daughter. This is about family, not legal documents." "Don't be dramatic," Amber sighed. "You're 27, not 17. Plenty of people your age live independently without running home at the first sign of trouble." "Monday morning, 9 a.m. I expect the keys on the kitchen counter and your things gone." Mom was openly crying now, but made no move to defend me. Harrison began explaining something about property rights and legal possession, but his words blurred together as blood rushed in my ears. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I can't believe this is happening," I managed to say, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. "I can't believe my own family would do this to me." Without waiting for a response, I fled the dining room, taking the stairs 2 at a time until I reached my childhood bedroom. The same room where Mom had helped me with homework, where Dad had comforted me after my first heartbreak, where Grandma Eleanor had taught me to knit during long winter evenings. I locked the door behind me and slid down against it, finally allowing the tears to come as my world collapsed around me. That night was the longest of my life. Sleep was impossible as my mind replayed the dinner scene on endless loop. Amber's smirk, Harrison's cold legalities, Mom's tears, Dad's avoidance. I kept expecting someone to knock on my door, to tell me it was all a terrible misunderstanding or a cruel joke. But the house remained silent except for the occasional creak of floorboards as everyone retreated to their separate corners. Around 3 a.m., panic about my immediate future set in. I grabbed my laptop and checked my bank account. $4,287.32, barely enough for 2 months of rent in the Greenwich area, and that was without considering security deposits or living expenses. The severance package from my job had mostly gone to paying off credit card debt and my car loan, a decision that now seemed horribly short-sighted. I desperately searched rental listings, but the options were grim. Studio apartments started at $1,800 per month, requiring proof of income 3 times the rent, impossible without a job. Roommate situations wanted immediate move-ins and long-term commitments I couldn't make while job hunting. The reality of potential homelessness loomed large in the darkness of my childhood bedroom, now feeling like borrowed space. Frantically, I scrolled through my phone contacts, weighing who I could call at this hour. Most friends had drifted away during my 6 years of workaholic lifestyle at Morgan Stanley. Those who remained were scattered across the country pursuing their own careers, with small apartments and busy lives. Who could I possibly impose on with such short notice? By dawn, my eyes burned from crying and screen glare. The first light filtering through my curtains felt like a countdown timer had started, day 1 of 3 before eviction from my own family home. I waited until I heard movement downstairs before emerging from my room, having rehearsed what I wanted to say. Mom was alone in the kitchen, mechanically stirring pancake batter, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She flinched slightly when she saw me. "How could you let this happen?" I asked without preamble, my voice raw from crying. Mom's hand trembled, batter dripping onto the counter. "We didn't have a choice, Rebecca." "There's always a choice," I countered. "You chose Amber. Again." Dad entered then, already dressed for his Saturday golf game as if nothing world-shattering had occurred the night before. He poured himself coffee, movements deliberately slow. "The will is legally binding," he said, not looking at me directly. "We consulted with our attorney. There's nothing we can do. You could stand up for me." I slammed my palm on the counter, making them both jump. "You could tell Amber that this is wrong. You could help me fight this." "Fight what?" Dad finally met my gaze, his expression hardening. "Your grandmother's final wishes? You want us to go against Eleanor's explicit instructions?" "I don't believe for 1 second that Grandma wanted this," I said. "She loved me. She loved this house. She wouldn't have given it to Amber just to have me thrown out." A flash of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed Dad's face before he masked it. "Eleanor changed her will. We were all surprised, but it's done. Why are you both really doing this?" I pressed, noticing how they exchanged glances. "What aren't you telling me?" Mom busied herself, wiping up spilled batter. Dad sipped his coffee. The silence stretched until finally, Mom spoke in a near whisper. "Amber and Harrison offered to let us stay in the house until we're ready to downsize, if we supported their position." The betrayal hit anew. "So, you sold me out to keep your own living situation secure?" "It's not that simple," Dad protested weakly. "It seems pretty simple to me," I retorted, fighting back fresh tears. "You chose your own comfort over your daughter's welfare. I lost my job, not my integrity." I left them standing in the kitchen, their breakfast forgotten, and returned to my room to start making desperate calls. My former colleague Nancy answered on the 3rd ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Rebecca? It's 7:30 on Saturday. Is everything okay?" I swallowed my pride and explained the situation, each word painful to articulate. Nancy's shock was evident. "That's horrible. Of course you can crash on my couch while you figure things out. It's not much, but it's yours as long as you need it." The relief was palpable but short-lived. Nancy's 1-bedroom apartment in Stamford would be a temporary bandage on a gushing wound. I needed income, a permanent living solution, and answers. Between packing sessions, I fired off job applications to anything remotely related to my field, lowering my salary expectations with each submission. I researched legal aid options, but without money for a retainer, my options were limited. Every path forward seemed blocked by the same obstacle, my sudden, unexpected poverty. Late in the afternoon of that first day, while sorting through old books to determine what I could possibly fit into Nancy's tiny apartment, I came across a drawer of Grandma Eleanor's letters I'd saved over the years. Her elegant handwriting brought fresh pain. This woman who had believed in me so completely couldn't possibly have orchestrated my downfall. As I tenderly reread her words of encouragement from my college years, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but desperation made me answer. "Is this Rebecca Winters?" An elderly woman's voice inquired. "Yes, speaking." "This is Mildred Henshaw, your grandmother Eleanor's friend from the garden club. I've been trying to reach you since the funeral, but your mother said you weren't accepting calls." I'm so glad I finally found your number in Eleanor's old address book. It's nice to hear from you, Mrs. Henshaw, I said, puzzled by her urgency and the misinformation. I'd never refused any calls. There's something not right about Eleanor's will, she said without preamble. She told me explicitly just weeks before she passed that she wanted you to have the family home. She was very clear about it. My heart raced. That's what I thought too, but apparently she changed her mind. Or someone changed it for her, Mildred replied ominously. Eleanor's mental state deteriorated rapidly in her final weeks, but even then, she spoke of you with such love. I found it shocking when I heard about the terms of the will. Something doesn't add up. For the first time since the dinner, I felt a flicker of hope. Mrs. Henshaw, would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow? I need to understand what happened. Absolutely, dear. Eleanor would want me to help. The truth needs to come out. As I hung up, I clutched one of Grandma's letters to my chest. Perhaps all wasn't lost after all. If there was even a chance that the will had been manipulated, I owed it to Grandma Eleanor and myself to discover the truth. The Bluebird Cafe sat on a quiet corner in downtown Greenwich, its faded awning and worn wooden tables a stark contrast to the upscale boutiques surrounding it. Mildred Henshaw had suggested it, mentioning that she and Grandma Eleanor had met there weekly for decades. As I pushed open the door, the familiar smell of coffee and cinnamon brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Grandma had often brought me here for hot chocolate after school. Mildred spotted me immediately, waving from a corner table. At 82, she was remarkably spry, her silver hair neatly coiffed and her outfit coordinated with the precision of someone who had grown up in an era when appearance mattered above all else. Rebecca, dear, she clasped my hands in her cool, papery ones. You look just like Eleanor at your age, that same determination in your eyes. We ordered coffee, and Mildred wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. 2 months before Eleanor passed, we met right at this table, she began, stirring her coffee methodically. She was excited because she had just updated her will. She told me specifically that she was leaving the house to you because, and I quote, Rebecca is the only one who truly loves that house for what it is, not what it's worth. My eyes stung with tears. That sounded exactly like Grandma. She mentioned that Amber would receive her investment portfolio, which was substantial. Mildred continued. Eleanor believed in balanced inheritances, but felt strongly that the house should go to you. Then what happened? I asked, leaning forward. Lawrence Phillips had been Eleanor's attorney for 30 years. But suddenly, there was a new lawyer, Bradford something or other. Very slick, very persuasive. He started visiting Eleanor regularly during her final weeks, when the pain medication often left her confused. Bradford, I repeated, making a mental note. Did Grandma ever explain why she switched lawyers? Mildred's expression darkened. That's what troubled me most. When I asked, Eleanor seemed confused by the question, as if she didn't remember making that decision. I tried to raise concerns with your parents, but they assured me everything was being handled properly.
She paused.
I should have pushed harder, but I didn't want to seem like a meddling old woman. You're helping me now, I reassured her. Do you remember Bradford's last name? Thornton, she said after a moment's thought. Bradford Thornton. Very expensive suit, luxury car. Not at all like Lawrence, who drove the same Volvo for 20 years. Armed with this name and Mildred's promise to provide a sworn statement if needed, I headed to the local library to use their computers, not wanting to risk researching on the family devices at home. Bradford Thornton's website was sleek and impressive, specializing in estate planning for high-net-worth individuals. What caught my eye was a client testimonial from someone named Chapman. With trembling fingers, I searched Bradford Thornton Harrison Chapman and felt sick when the results loaded. There it was, in black and white, a Business Journal article from 3 years ago featuring Harrison accepting an award, with Bradford Thornton described as Chapman's longtime legal advisor and friend. The connection was undeniable. I dug deeper, searching public records and social media. Buried in a year-old Instagram post was a photo of Amber, Harrison, and Bradford on a yacht, tagged #business and pleasure. The date corresponded with the period when Grandma Eleanor had been hospitalized for her final decline. Back at the house, I waited until my parents left for their weekly bridge game before slipping into Dad's study. His computer was password protected, but he'd used the same one, my mother's birthday, for as long as I could remember. Within minutes, I was scrolling through his email. What I found made my blood run cold. Emails between Dad, Amber, and Bradford dating back 3 months, discussing the revised estate plan and how to manage Rebecca's expectations. One particularly damning message from Amber read, "Once everything is transferred, we'll honor our agreement about your continued residence. Just make sure Rebecca doesn't suspect anything until it's finalized." I downloaded the emails to a flash drive with shaking hands, feeling physically ill. The depth of the conspiracy was staggering. But worse was yet to come. In a folder labeled Eleanor Medical, I found scanned copies of Grandma's medical records from her final weeks. The attending physician had noted, patient often disoriented and confused due to pain medication. Questionable capacity for major decisions. Yet the new will had been signed during exactly this period. Even more disturbing was a financial statement I found buried in Dad's records. Harrison and Amber's company was deeply in debt, with multiple properties in foreclosure. They were on the verge of bankruptcy unless they could secure a significant asset like our family home to use as collateral for emergency loans. Everything suddenly made horrifying sense. Amber hadn't wanted the house out of sentiment or even spite. She needed it to save her and Harrison's failing business empire. And my parents had colluded in this scheme to secure their own future living arrangements. I was still sitting in Dad's study, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, when they returned home earlier than expected. Mom's face drained of color when she saw the computer screen and the papers spread across the desk. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" Dad demanded, his voice rising. "Those are private documents." "Private conspiracy documents, you mean?" I replied, my voice eerily calm despite the rage and hurt boiling inside me. "I know everything. About Bradford Thornton being Harrison's attorney. About Grandma being drugged and confused when she supposedly changed her will. About Amber and Harrison being nearly bankrupt." Mom collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Dad's expression shifted from anger to resignation. "You don't understand the complexity of the situation," he said weakly. "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Explain why you helped rob your own mother of her agency and me of my inheritance." "Harrison approached us first," Dad admitted after a long silence. "He showed us their financial statements. They were going to lose everything. Amber was facing humiliation, possibly even legal trouble for some of their business practices. So you decided to sacrifice me instead," I said flatly. "We made the best decision we could for the whole family," Dad insisted. "Amber and Harrison needed the house more than you did. They're married, planning for children. You're single, with a promising career, had a promising career," I corrected bitterly. "Which you knew I'd lost when you agreed to this scheme." "We didn't know initially," Mom interjected, her voice small. "By the time you lost your job, things were already in motion. And you didn't think to stop them? To stand up for me when I was at my most vulnerable?" The silence that followed was answer enough. They had known everything and chosen Amber anyway. The favorite child won again, this time taking everything that mattered. "They offered us security," Dad finally said. "A legal agreement that we could stay in the house until we're ready to move to a retirement community. At our age, with my pension being what it is, we couldn't afford to buy another home in this area. So you sold me out for a place to live," I summarized, the betrayal cutting deeper with each revelation. "Did you even consider what would happen to me?" "Amber assured us she'd help you find a new place," Mom offered lamely. I laughed bitterly. "And you believed her? After knowing her your entire lives?" The crushing weight of their betrayal hit me all at once. My own parents had conspired against me, prioritizing Amber's needs and their own comfort over my welfare. The family I thought I could rely on had methodically planned my displacement while smiling to my face and offering false reassurances. I stood on shaky legs, gathering the evidence I'd collected. "I'm going to fight this," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Not just for me, but for Grandma Eleanor. What you've done isn't just wrong, it's potentially illegal." "Rebecca, please." Mom reached for me, tears streaming down her face. "We're still family. We can work this out." I stepped back from her touch. "Family doesn't do what you've done. Not to someone they love." As I walked away, I felt something break inside me. The last vestiges of my childhood belief in the sanctity of family bonds. The pain was excruciating, like a physical wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I barely made it to my room before the panic attack hit, dropping to my knees as the walls seemed to close in. Between gasping breaths, I questioned everything. My childhood memories, my place in the family, my identity as a daughter and sister. If my family could betray me so completely, what did that say about me? About the relationships I'd trusted my entire life? The foundations of my world weren't just shaken. They were revealed to be elaborate facades hiding ugly truths. As the panic slowly subsided, leaving me hollow and exhausted, a strange clarity emerged through the emotional fog. I had less than 48 hours before Amber's deadline. I could either collapse under the weight of this betrayal or use it as fuel to fight back. For the first time in my life, no one was coming to save me. If justice was going to be served, I would have to be the one to demand it. Day 2 of Amber's ultimatum dawned gray and drizzly, matching my emotional state perfectly. After a night of fitful sleep punctuated by anxiety dreams, I forced myself to start the practical process of packing, a tacit admission that despite my determination to fight, I might still end up homeless in 24 hours. My childhood bedroom was a time capsule of sorts. Each item I picked up carried memories. Debate team trophies, Cornell pennants, the stuffed bear Dad won for me at a carnival when I was 7. How could the same father who had spent hours trying to win that prize now be complicit in my eviction? The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. I found myself moving in slow motion, unable to decide what was essential and what could be left behind. How do you condense a lifetime into a few suitcases? Nancy's apartment was tiny, with barely enough room for a temporary sleeping arrangement on her couch, let alone storage for my possessions. Around noon, I realized I hadn't eaten since coffee with Mildred. The thought of food made my stomach turn, but I knew I needed strength for what lay ahead. I ventured downstairs to find the house eerily quiet. A note on the kitchen counter informed me that my parents had errands to run. A transparent excuse to avoid confrontation after yesterday's revelations. As I half-heartedly assembled a sandwich, the front door opened. My body tensed, expecting my parents, but Amber's voice called out instead. "Just me. Thought I'd check how the packing is coming along." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, looking irritatingly fresh and put together. "Don't pretend this is a friendly visit," I said flatly, not bothering to hide my hostility. Amber sighed dramatically. "I'm trying to be civil, Rebecca. This doesn't have to be ugly. You're throwing me out of my home during the worst period of my life, after manipulating our dying grandmother. There's no version of this that isn't ugly. Always the victim." She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "For your information, I'm being incredibly generous. Most new homeowners would give tenants just 24 hours notice. I'm not a tenant. I'm family." The word tasted bitter now. Amber glanced around the kitchen with a proprietary air that made my skin crawl. "I'm thinking of gutting this entire space. Harrison knows a wonderful contractor who specializes in gourmet kitchens. This whole farmhouse aesthetic is so dated." Grandma Eleanor had personally selected every detail of the kitchen renovation 10 years ago, lovingly preserving the home's historical character while updating its functionality. The casual dismissal of her careful choices felt like another violation. "Why are you really here, Amber?" I asked, setting down my untouched sandwich. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just making sure you're on schedule. The movers are coming Monday morning for some of the furniture we're keeping. It would be awkward if you were still lingering." The deliberate cruelty took my breath away. After she left, I abandoned any pretense of eating and returned to my packing, tears blurring my vision as I worked. By evening, I'd filled 6 boxes and 2 suitcases, but had made barely a dent in my belongings. My parents returned but kept their distance, moving around me like I was already a ghost in the house. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional muffled conversation behind closed doors. Shortly before midnight, I retreated to the bathroom, the one place I could guarantee privacy. Staring at my reflection, I barely recognized the person looking back. Pale, with dark circles under red-rimmed eyes, hair limp and unwashed. I looked like a stranger to myself, someone hollowed out and defeated. The weight of everything, job loss, betrayal, impending homelessness, crashed down on me at once. My legs gave way, and I sank to the cold tile floor, back against the bathtub, as silent sobs racked my body. This was rock bottom, alone on a bathroom floor, betrayed by everyone I'd trusted, with nowhere to go and no plan that seemed viable. In that moment of utter desolation, my hand unconsciously went to my neck, fingers finding the delicate gold chain I always wore. Grandma Eleanor's locket. I'd put it on the day of her funeral and hadn't taken it off since. With trembling fingers, I opened the heart-shaped pendant to reveal the tiny photo inside, me at about 8 years old, sitting on Grandma's lap in the garden, both of us laughing at something long forgotten. A memory surfaced through the fog of despair. I was 16, struggling with Amber's constant competitiveness and my parents' apparent blindness to it. Sitting in the garden with Grandma Eleanor, I tearfully asked why Amber seemed to hate me so much. Some people, Grandma had said thoughtfully, are so afraid of not having enough that they can never be satisfied, even when their cup overflows. Your sister fears scarcity, of attention, of validation, of security. But you, Rebecca, you understand abundance. You know that there is always enough love, enough success, enough joy to go around. That's why you'll ultimately be happier than she ever will. She'd taken my hands in hers then, her grip surprisingly strong. Never let anyone dim your light, especially not family. The world is full of people who will try to convince you that you're less than you are. Stand your ground. Truth always finds a way to the surface, like water. All it needs is one persistent path. I closed the locket, pressing it against my heart as Grandma's words resonated anew. I'd been so caught up in the shock and pain of betrayal that I nearly surrendered to despair. But that wasn't who I was. That wasn't who Grandma Eleanor had raised me to be. The bathroom clock showed 3:17 a.m. when something shifted inside me. The grief and hurt remained, but alongside them grew a fierce, burning determination. Giving up meant Amber won. It meant my parents' betrayal went unchallenged. It meant Grandma Eleanor's true wishes would be buried forever. I stood up, splashed cold water on my face, and looked myself in the eye. Enough, I whispered to my reflection. Enough feeling sorry for yourself. It's time to fight back. I returned to my room with renewed purpose, pulling out a notebook to formulate a comprehensive plan of action. By dawn, I had pages of notes, a timeline of events, and a list of potential allies and resources. I might have limited time and even more limited finances, but I had something Amber and Harrison didn't. The truth on my side. I reached for my phone and sent a text to Nancy. Change of plans. I still need a place to stay, but more importantly, I need your help fighting back. This isn't over. Her reply came almost instantly, despite the early hour. Whatever you need. We're in this together. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. I might be at my lowest point, but from here, there was nowhere to go but up. The legal aid clinic occupied a modest office above a dry cleaner's in downtown Stamford. The waiting room was crowded despite the early hour, filled with people whose tense expressions mirrored my own internal state. I'd spent what felt like my last reserves of energy researching legal options through the night, and this free consultation was my only hope of professional guidance, without money for a retainer. After an hour's wait, I was ushered into a small office where Monica Rodriguez introduced herself as a staff attorney specializing in elder law and estate disputes. In her mid-40s with practical, no-nonsense glasses and a demeanor to match, She listened without interruption as I laid out the situation, presenting the evidence I'd gathered. "This is deeply concerning," she said when I finished, examining the medical records and email printouts. "If what you're describing is accurate, we're looking at potential undue influence, questionable testamentary capacity, and possibly even elder abuse. Can you help me fight this?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "The clinic can't represent you in a contested will case. We don't have the resources," she explained, making my heart sink. "But," she continued, "I believe you have a strong enough case to interest a private attorney on contingency. If you win, they get paid from the estate." She drafted a letter formally contesting the will and advised me to deliver it to all parties immediately, which would legally prevent any property transfers until the matter was resolved. She also helped me prepare for gathering additional evidence, emphasizing the importance of Mildred's testimony and any other witnesses to Grandma Eleanor's true intentions. "One more thing," Monica said as I was leaving. "Document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every text message. You're dealing with people who have already shown they'll manipulate the truth." Armed with Monica's advice and the formal contest letter, I spent the day building my case. I contacted Lawrence Phillips, Grandma's original attorney, who expressed shock at being replaced in Eleanor's final weeks. "I'd worked with your grandmother for decades," he said. "She never gave me any indication she wanted to change her will in that manner. In fact, quite the opposite. Mildred Henshaw connected me with 3 other members of the Garden Club who all confirmed hearing Eleanor express her intention to leave the house to me. One even had a birthday card from Grandma mentioning her excitement about ensuring Rebecca always has a home in the house she loves so much." By Sunday evening, the final day of Amber's ultimatum, I had assembled a compelling collection of evidence suggesting the revised will did not reflect Grandma Eleanor's true wishes and may have been executed when she lacked capacity to make such decisions. I arrived back at the house to find my parents' car gone, but Amber's parked in the driveway.
Perfect.
It was time for the confrontation I'd been preparing for. I found Amber and Harrison in the living room, casually discussing paint colors as if the house were already theirs to renovate. They looked up in surprise when I entered. "We expected you to be finishing your packing," Amber said, frowning at my empty hands. "Change of plans," I replied calmly. "I've called a family meeting. Mom and Dad should be home soon." "We don't have time for this," Harrison started, but I cut him off. "Make time. Unless you'd prefer I take this evidence directly to the district attorney instead of giving you a chance to explain." That got their attention. Amber's face paled slightly, and Harrison's jaw tightened. 20 minutes later, my parents arrived home to find us sitting in tense silence in the living room. "What's going on?" Dad asked, noticing the unusual tableau. "Rebecca has apparently called a family meeting," Amber said with forced lightness. "Though I don't see the point when everything's already decided." "Is it?" I stood, retrieving my folder of evidence from my bag. "Let's talk about how those decisions were made, shall we?" Over the next hour, I methodically presented everything I discovered: Bradford Thornton's connection to Harrison, Grandma's medical records showing her diminished capacity, the emails revealing the conspiracy, the financial documents exposing Amber and Harrison's desperate situation, and the testimonies from multiple witnesses about Grandma's true intentions. "This is nothing but circumstantial evidence," Harrison blustered, but his legal bravado was undermined by the sweat beading on his forehead. "Tell that to the judge," I replied. "I've formally contested the will. No property transfers can occur until this is resolved in court." Amber's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're doing. We need this house. Without it, everything we've built will collapse." "You mean the house you were planning to use as collateral for loans to save your failing business?" I asked pointedly. "The business that's drowning in debt because of your risky investments." Harrison shot Amber a warning look, but she was too far gone. "It's not fair," she exploded. "You always had everything handed to you. The grades, the scholarships, Grandma's approval. I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. This house should be mine." "So you manipulated a dying woman to get what you wanted," I said quietly. You took advantage of Grandma when she was at her most vulnerable. She was confused anyway, Amber retorted defensively. She barely recognized any of us near the end. What difference does it make who got the house? At least we needed it for something important, not just because we couldn't hold down a job. The cruelty of her words hung in the air. Mom gasped softly, and even Harrison looked uncomfortable with the naked resentment Amber was displaying. Is that what you told yourselves to justify elder abuse? I asked. That it didn't matter because she was dying anyway? It wasn't abuse, Amber insisted, but her voice wavered. Bradford just helped her understand what made the most sense for everyone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my final piece of evidence, a small digital recorder. I thought you might say something like that, which is why I recorded a conversation with Bradford Thornton this morning. This was a bluff. I hadn't actually spoken with Bradford, but the effect was instantaneous. Amber went completely white, and Harrison looked like he might be sick. You're bluffing, Harrison said, but without conviction. Want to hear it? I held up the recorder. Bradford was surprisingly forthcoming about the methods he used to persuade Grandma. Something about signing papers during her pain medication peaks when she was most suggestible. Harrison grabbed Amber's arm, squeezing tightly. We need to talk. Now. He practically dragged her into the hallway, their heated whispers just audible from the living room. My parents sat in stunned silence, the full reality of the situation seemingly hitting them for the first time. Did Bradford really admit to that? Dad finally asked. Does it matter? I countered. We all know what happened. The only question is whether you're going to continue supporting this fraud or stand up for what's right. Before they could answer, Amber and Harrison returned. Harrison looked resigned, but Amber was seething. Fine, she spat. Contest the will. Drag us all through a public legal battle. Expose family business to everyone. Is that what you want? I want justice for Grandma Eleanor, I said simply. And I want the truth acknowledged. The truth is that we're broke, Amber shouted, tears of frustration in her eyes. Harrison's last 3 developments failed. We've been living on credit for months. Without this house to secure emergency financing, we'll lose everything. Harrison winced at this public admission of their financial distress. What my wife means, he interjected, attempting damage control, is that we're in a temporary cash flow situation that— Stop lying, Amber interrupted, collapsing onto the sofa. It's over, Harrison. We're finished. The fight seemed to drain out of her suddenly, replaced by a defeated resignation I'd never seen in my always perfect sister before. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, she said quietly. Bradford promised no one would question the will, that it would be simple. Nothing about manipulating a dying woman is simple, I replied, but without the anger that had fueled me earlier. Seeing Amber's genuine distress gave me no satisfaction. What happens now? Mom asked, looking between us with tear-filled eyes. That depends, I said. Are you all willing to admit what really happened and make this right? Or do we let a judge decide? The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of years of family dynamics, buried resentments, and difficult truths finally coming to light. We stood at a crossroads, and the path we chose would forever define us, as individuals and as a family. The weeks following the confrontation passed in a blur of legal meetings, emotional processing, and practical adjustments. The immediate aftermath had been messy, Amber storming out in tears, Harrison making vague threats about counter-litigation, my parents oscillating between guilt and defensiveness. But by morning, reality had set in for everyone. Bradford Thornton, when faced with potential ethics charges that could end his career, quickly crumbled. He provided a sworn statement admitting he had facilitated the will changes knowing Eleanor's capacity was questionable. He also confirmed the connection to Harrison and the plan to use the house as loan collateral. The legal process to invalidate the fraudulent will began immediately. The court appointed a temporary administrator for Grandma Eleanor's estate and issued an injunction preventing any property transfers until the matter was resolved. I was permitted to remain in the house during this period, a small victory that provided much-needed stability as I continued job hunting. Nancy proved an invaluable friend throughout this ordeal. When I called to tell her I could stay in the house for now, she insisted on coming over with groceries and wine. "You've been through emotional warfare," she said, wrapping me in a fierce hug. "You need sustenance and someone who's completely on your side." That night, for the first time since the fateful dinner, I allowed myself to truly break down, not in hopeless despair, but in the safe space of friendship, releasing the accumulated tension of betrayal and confrontation. Nancy listened without judgment as I cycled through anger, grief, and confusion about how to move forward. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," she reminded me gently. "One step at a time." The next step came unexpectedly. A former client from Morgan Stanley had heard about my layoff and reached out with a job opportunity at a smaller firm focusing on ethical investments. The position would mean a pay cut from my previous salary but offered flexibility and alignment with values I'd come to appreciate more since witnessing the consequences of Harrison and Amber's cutthroat business approach. The interview felt different from any I'd done before. Instead of projecting perfection and confidence, I spoke honestly about my recent experiences and how they'd clarified what mattered to me professionally. "I've seen firsthand how financial decisions impact real lives," I explained. "I want to be part of solutions that help people build security without compromising integrity." They offered me the position the same day. The salary would be tight, but it would keep me afloat. More importantly, it represented a fresh start. A career built on my own terms rather than external expectations of success. As I built this new professional foundation, I simultaneously worked on my personal reconstruction. I found a therapist specializing in family trauma, Dr. Winters, who helped me process the complex emotions surrounding the betrayal. "What your family did was wrong," she affirmed in our second session. "You don't need to minimize that or rush to forgiveness." "But they're still my family," I said, struggling with a contradiction. "Despite everything, I love them." "Love and boundaries can coexist," she replied. "In fact, they must for relationships to be healthy." This concept became my guiding principle as my parents made tentative attempts at reconciliation. Dad dropped off my favorite coffee one morning with a note saying simply, "I'm sorry. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." Mom sent text messages checking if I needed anything, carefully respectful of my space. I maintained distance while I sorted through my feelings, but eventually agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a park where we'd often had family picnics when I was young. The conversation was difficult, with moments of defensiveness giving way to genuine remorse as they confronted the reality of how deeply their actions had hurt me. We got caught up in Amber's panic and Harrison's smooth assurances, Dad explained, his voice heavy with regret. "We told ourselves we were making the best decision for everyone, but the truth is, we were scared of losing our home, scared of confrontation, scared of choosing sides. We chose wrong, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." "I need you to understand something," I said after listening to their explanations. "I don't expect our relationship to just go back to normal. Trust has been broken. It will take time to rebuild, if that's even possible." "We understand," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "We just want a chance to try." "I'm willing to try too," I replied honestly, "but on my terms, with clear boundaries." Those boundaries included regular therapy sessions, both individual and eventually family counseling. I made it clear that my forgiveness would not be rushed or taken for granted, and that any future relationship would need to be built on complete transparency and respect for my autonomy. Amber was a more complicated situation. After her breakdown during the confrontation, she and Harrison separated. The financial house of cards they'd built together collapsed completely, forcing bankruptcy proceedings and a very public fall from social grace. Amber moved temporarily to our aunt's house in New Jersey, and we had no contact for nearly 2 months. Her text, when it finally came, was unexpected. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'd like to talk. On your terms." We met at the Bluebird Cafe, where the ghost of Grandma Eleanor seemed to hover protectively. Amber looked nothing like the polished, perfect sister I'd grown up envying. Her designer clothes were replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her immaculate makeup absent, dark circles visible under her eyes. "I've been in therapy," she said without preamble. "Intensive therapy. Turns out I have a lot of issues to work through." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Competing with you is easier than facing my own insecurities. I convinced myself that if I could just get the things you had, recognition, grandma's approval, success on my terms, I'd finally feel good enough." "And did it work?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "Never. There was always something else to chase, something else you had that I didn't." It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. "What about now?"
Now.
She considered the question carefully. "Now I'm learning to define success differently. To recognize my own worth without comparing it to anyone else's. It's hard, but it's freeing." The conversation wasn't miraculous or immediate reconciliation, but it was honest in a way our interactions had never been before. We agreed to proceed cautiously, monthly coffee meetings with no pressure or expectations beyond basic civility. It was a small step, but a significant one. 3 months after the initial confrontation, the court invalidated the fraudulent will and recognized Grandma Eleanor's previous will as valid. As Mildred and the other witnesses had testified, the house was indeed left to me, with financial assets divided between Amber and me, and specific personal items designated for my parents. The day the decision became official, I stood alone in Grandma Eleanor's garden, now my garden. The late summer flowers were in full bloom, dahlias and black-eyed Susans she'd planted decades ago still faithfully returning each year. I felt her presence strongly, as if she were standing beside me, nodding in approval. "I did it, Grandma," I whispered to the gentle breeze. I stood my ground. The house no longer felt haunted by betrayal. I'd reclaimed it room by room, replacing painful recent memories with new ones. Nancy helping me repaint the kitchen, my new colleagues coming over for a dinner party, even Dad stopping by to fix a leaky faucet in a tentative step toward redemption. As I stood in the garden that day, I realized that my victory wasn't just about keeping the house. It was about discovering my own strength, defining my boundaries, and learning that family, true family, is built on respect, honesty, and mutual support, not merely shared DNA. Grandma Eleanor had given me much more than a physical home. She'd given me the courage to create a home within myself that no one could ever take away. 6 months after the fateful dinner that had shattered my world, I hosted a small gathering in the newly renovated sunroom, once Grandma Eleanor's favorite space in the house, now transformed into a bright, welcoming area that honored her aesthetic while reflecting my own. The spring sunshine streamed through the windows, casting golden light across the faces of the carefully selected guests. My career at Horizon Ethical Investments had flourished beyond my expectations. What began as a lifeline during crisis had evolved into a genuine passion. My experience fighting for justice in my own life had translated into a fierce advocacy for clients seeking financial security without ethical compromise. Last month, I'd been promoted to senior advisor with my own team, actually exceeding my former Morgan Stanley salary through performance bonuses. The house, once a battlefield, had become truly mine in every sense. I'd kept the historical character Grandma Eleanor had so lovingly preserved while updating spaces to reflect my personality. The formal dining room where Amber had delivered her cruel ultimatum was now a home office, the negative energy completely transformed. Each change, whether structural or decorative, felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. Amber and Harrison's divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Harrison had relocated to Chicago to work for his father's company, a significant step down from his former entrepreneurial status, but necessary given his tarnished reputation in Connecticut financial circles. Amber had surprised everyone by training to become a paralegal, working now for a nonprofit legal aid organization similar to the one that had helped me. Our relationship remained complicated, but was slowly healing. Our monthly coffee meetings had gradually evolved into more meaningful conversations, with moments of genuine connection breaking through the scar tissue of our painful history. She wasn't at today's gathering. We weren't quite there yet, but the fact that I could imagine a future event including her seemed like progress. My parents were present, though. Our reconciliation had been slow and deliberate, with professional guidance from our family therapist. They'd had to earn back my trust through consistent actions rather than mere apologies. Dad had been particularly dedicated to making amends, helping with house projects and respecting my boundaries without question. Mom had found it harder to relinquish her enabling behaviors, but was genuinely trying. Today, they moved somewhat cautiously through the space, clearly grateful to be included. Nancy was there too, now my closest friend, rather than merely a former colleague. She'd been my rock throughout the entire ordeal, offering both practical support and emotional ballast when I needed it most. Mildred Henshaw held court in a comfortable armchair, regaling anyone who would listen with stories about Grandma Eleanor's adventures in the garden club. Other guests included my new colleagues, neighbors, and friends who had formed my chosen family during the rebuilding of my life. As I circulated among my guests, serving drinks and ensuring everyone was comfortable, Nancy pulled me aside with an odd expression. "Have you looked through all of Grandma Eleanor's books yet?" she asked mysteriously. "Most of them, why?" "I was browsing her collection while you were in the kitchen, and I found something tucked inside her copy of Jane Eyre." She handed me an envelope, yellowed with age, my name written in Grandma's distinctive handwriting. My heart raced as I excused myself to the quiet of the kitchen, carefully opening the sealed envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter dated just 1 month before Grandma Eleanor's death, the handwriting shaky but determined. "My dearest Rebecca," it began, "if you're reading this, then things have unfolded as I feared they might. I've lived long enough to recognize the patterns in our family, to see how Amber's insecurities and your parents' conflict avoidance could create a perfect storm after my passing. I've done my best to protect you legally, but documents can be changed and influence can be exerted. Know that my true wish has always been for you to have this house, to continue its legacy of warmth and welcome." Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading, but I've prepared for contingencies. "You are stronger than you know, Rebecca. You have always faced challenges with grace and determination, finding your way through difficulties that would defeat lesser spirits. I have complete faith that whatever situation arises, you will handle it with the integrity and resilience that make me so proud to be your grandmother. Now for the practical matter, I've established a separate account in your name at Greenwich National Bank. It contains sufficient funds to secure your future, whether that means fighting for this house or building a new home elsewhere. The account details are enclosed on a separate card. This money is completely independent from my will and known only to myself and my trusted friend Walter Jenkins at the bank. No one can take this from you. Remember, my darling girl, that home is not merely a physical structure, but a feeling you carry within. I've tried to teach you that by example. Whatever happens with this house, know that you have the power to create home wherever you go, to build warmth and welcome from the strength of your character rather than mere wooden beams and plaster walls. I love you beyond measure. Your grandmother, Eleanor." Enclosed was a bank card and account information for a sum that made me gasp. Over $500,000, enough to have purchased a new home, even in expensive Greenwich, if I had lost the legal battle. The realization hit me like a physical force. Grandma Eleanor hadn't just left me a house. She had created a test of character for the entire family. She had anticipated the potential for conflict and manipulation, arranged protection for me regardless of outcome, and then watched from beyond to see what choices we would all make. I leaned against the kitchen counter, clutching the letter to my chest, overwhelmed by the depth of her foresight and love. She had known Amber might try to take the house. She had suspected my parents might cave to pressure. She had prepared for every contingency, while still hoping for the best from her family. And in the end, the truth had indeed found its way to the surface, just as she predicted. The house had returned to me not because of the hidden money, which I hadn't known about until now, but because I had found the courage to stand up for what was right, to fight for justice even when it meant confronting those I loved. When I returned to my guests, Something in my expression must have revealed my emotional state because the room quieted, everyone looking at me expectantly. "I'd like to make an announcement," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling within. "Today isn't just about celebrating a new beginning for me personally. It's about honoring Grandma Eleanor's legacy in a meaningful way." I took a deep breath, sharing the discovery of the letter and her hidden provision for my security. My parents exchanged glances of shame and regret, but I continued without dwelling on the past. Grandma believed that a home should be a place of welcome and support, especially for those facing difficult transitions. In her honor, I've decided to use the funds she set aside to establish the Eleanor Winters Foundation. Half of this house will be converted into transitional housing for women rebuilding their lives after family crises, whether from betrayal, loss, or other circumstances that have left them vulnerable. Murmurs of surprise and approval rippled through the room. My parents looked stunned, but moved. Mildred dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, nodding vigorously. "I'll continue to live here, of course," I clarified. "But the East Wing will be renovated to create 3 private suites for women who need a safe place to land while they figure out their next steps, just as I needed when my own family support collapsed." The foundation would provide not just housing but connections to legal aid, career counseling, and therapy, all the resources that had helped me rebuild when my world shattered. It felt right, a perfect tribute to Grandma Eleanor's values and a transformation of pain into purpose. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, I found myself alone with my parents in the garden. The setting sun cast long shadows across the newly turned earth where I'd been preparing to plant Grandma's favorite roses. "I owe you an apology," Dad said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not just for what happened with the will, but for every time I failed to see you clearly throughout your life. For every time I took the path of least resistance instead of standing up for what was right." Mom reached for my hand, her own trembling slightly. "Eleanor would be so proud of who you've become," she said softly. "Even more than she already was. And we are too, though we have no right to claim any credit." "She knew," I said, looking out over the garden Grandma had tended so lovingly. "She knew what might happen, and she prepared me anyway. Not by sheltering me from it, but by teaching me how to weather the storm." "She was always the wisest among us," Dad acknowledged. As they prepared to leave, Mom hesitated at the garden gate. "Rebecca, about Amber?" she began uncertainly. "I know," I said, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. "She's still finding her way. Tell her Grandma's roses will be blooming in a few months. Maybe she'd like to see them." It wasn't complete forgiveness. That would take more time and continued evidence of change, but it was an opening, a possibility I wouldn't have considered months earlier. After they left, I returned to the sunroom with a glass of wine, settling into the window seat that overlooked the garden. The letter from Grandma Eleanor lay open beside me, her final gift not just financial security, but the wisdom to understand what truly matters. My phone chimed with a text from Nancy. "You absolutely rocked that announcement today. Eleanor Winters Foundation. Your grandma is doing cartwheels in heaven." I smiled, feeling Grandma's presence strongly in that moment. The house around me no longer echoed with betrayal and pain. Instead, it hummed with possibility, with the promise of becoming not just my sanctuary, but a place of healing for others facing their own crossroads. The final piece had fallen into place. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just this physical structure of wood and stone, but the values she had instilled in me: resilience, integrity, and the courage to transform suffering into service. In fighting for this house, I had discovered something far more valuable: the unshakable home I had built within myself, one that no one could ever take away. What would you do if your family betrayed you like-minded? Would you fight back or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope my experience helps anyone facing their own family battles to find the strength to stand up for themselves.